Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. We have a number of people who are online, so if you wave to the camera over there, everyone will be able to see you and say hello. We have a number of panelists from different institutions in Virginia here today, and they're going to talk a bit about their work on different sorts of open projects. They have a really wide range of experiences, both in writing, teaching and learning, in pedagogy, and I'm really excited to hear from each of them. So I'm going to ask each of them just to really briefly introduce themselves, name, title, institution, what's your discipline, and then I'll ask them to give a little bit longer presentation each. And our goal here is to just have a really great conversation about teaching and learning in the open and to learn a lot from each other. So would you like to start?
Sure. Okay. All right. Do we need to talk into this?
If you have a quiet voice, this is for room amplification.
I'm going to go without, but please let me know if you guys can't hear me. I'm James Harder. I'm with the Office of Experiential Learning here at Virginia Tech, and most recently, I actually ran the Beyond Boundaries initiative. So for those who are here at Virginia Tech, probably are pretty familiar, but that initiative was looking at what does higher education need to be in a generation. So we were focused on the year 2047.
Okay, well, I'll touch this. Hello? I can't hear any. Oh, now I do. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Jennifer Kidd. I'm from Old Dominion University, and I teach future teachers. So today I'll be talking about a project that my students and I do together where they create their own textbook.
Hi everyone, I'm Matt DeCarlo. I'm an assistant professor of social work at Radford University, just down the road from here.
Good morning, I'm Amy Nelson. I'm in the history department here.
And I'm Sue Erickson. I'm library director at Virginia Wesleyan University in Virginia Beach.
So I'd like each of you to tell us a little bit about your approach or your project. How did you get started, as well as how you got started in your particular project? And maybe, can we start with you?
Sure.
Okay.
So my project in the Open is OpenLearning 18. Yep.
You really have to put the microphone right in front of your mouth. Yes.
Is that better?
They can,
okay.
Yes.
And actually, I forgot someone. We have a panelist who is online. Kathryn, would you like to introduce yourself and your students?
Can you hear us
Yes,
right now?
yes, we can hear you fine.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm sorry about that. We're still having really bad audio problems. But anyway, I'm Kathryn Murphy-Judy. I'm a professor of French and global media at Virginia Commonwealth University. And two of the students who are working on our project are here with me today.
I'm Carrie Hamilton. I'm a political science student and I work on the project with Russia.
And I'm Savannah Agner. I'm a double major in Spanish and Latin American studies, and I've been working on the Spanish and Italian components of the project.
Great, thank you. So we'll have Sue go. We'll just go down the table, and then Kathryn will have you at the end.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
So I'm Sue Erickson. My project in the Open is OpenLearning 18, and this is a connectivist MOOC. So it's fully online. We have participants from all over the country and really from around the globe. And that started last year as OpenLearning 17. So that was run last spring. And it was originally a project under AAC&U's Faculty Collaboratives project. So this was part of their LEAP initiative. And so AAC&U asked Gardner Campbell from VCU to put together a steering committee. And Amy has been on that as well. So that's how that got started. I came into the project a little bit late when they decided that it would be a good idea to get a librarian on board. And actually, it's because of Virginia Tech, interestingly enough, Sure. That I got involved because I came to the CIDR conference, and instead of eating lunch alone, I found a friendly-looking person to eat lunch with, and that was Stephanie Blackman, who is in the education department at the College of William and Mary. And we started talking about OER, and we found that we had a common interest in OER. And so a year later, a full year later, she dug out my email when the Faculty Collaboratives group decided it was time to bring a librarian on board, and she got in touch with me. So that's how I got involved. Do you want me to leave it there, or talk a little more?
What does your project do?
So our project it's really professional development in the open. The first year we referred to it as faculty development, and then we realized that there were a lot of people who might not consider themselves faculty who would be interested in this. So we have librarians, we have instructional technologists, we have a variety of people involved in higher education. And it's really a learn by doing environment. So we are learning about open learning by participating in open learning. And so we have a website that we refer to as the Hub. It's openlearninghub.net. And that is where all of the activity is archived. It's where activity gets syndicated. So we encourage people to set up blogs if they don't already have them. And then syndicate their blog to the Hub so that their blog posts show up in the Hub as they are posted. And then we also have a syndication for the hashtag OpenLearning18 from Twitter. So that's always refreshing the page that way and really getting people connected in the Hub. So the Hub is really kind of the site where it brings everything together. We have all of the OpenLearning 17 materials that are still there, still available. So people can participate live, they can participate while OpenLearning is active, or you can go back to it later and review things that way. This year we set up a YouTube account, so now we have a place where we can archive all of the live events, like this one. And so that's been really helpful to keep everything connected. So we do a lot to support student agency. So each week is on a different topic. So for example, this week we're looking at open pedagogy, and Amy is actually leading this week. And so we have a number of different live events that relate to that, but then we also have readings. And very often we have a different facilitator for each week. So each member of the steering committee is leading at least 1 week, kind of being the designer of the learning for that week. And we will often give options for the reading. So that supports this idea that Anita referred to as student agency. We want the participants in the course to feel like they are making choices about what they do. The blogging really encourages openness in a different sense. Yeah.
Could you use the podium mic?
This one?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. How's that?
Yes.
Yes? Okay. So we'll pass the podium mic. So one of the things the blogging encourages is this, I think of it as a sense of vulnerability. So I'm opening myself up to, so I'm opening myself up to other people and engaging with other people. People might comment on my blog, and that's an important feature of this type of learning. And it's also a very get what you give, so the more people participate, the more they're going to get out of it.
Okay. Hi, can you hear me? Is this good? Is this working? Is this all right or not?
It is. It's still a little spotty, but it's definitely better.
Better?
Than handheld. Yes.
Okay.
You're so tall. All right. So hi, I'm Amy Nelson, and I came to Open Education and Open Learning through a series of fortunate events that started with procrastinating about getting ready for class and hoping for more meaningful interaction with my students and having a sort of long, deep frustration with what students actually left my class with. So I stumbled into a faculty development session that Gardner Campbell ran. So this is about 5 years ago. And just that kind of 1 hour helped me shift the way I sort of thought about what I was doing in the classroom. And over the course of the next couple of years, I moved everything more into the open and started doing more and more collaboratively, and really shifted away from thinking about giving courses to helping students make courses. So we make courses together, and I want them to have tangibles. I don't like deliverables, but tangible things that they take with them into the world when the course ends. So usually some kind of portfolio. And I'm now involved in, I don't really have one project, I've got a bunch of projects. So, I would say the original project was the sort of reimagining and reinvention of myself in the classroom with my students, who are primarily there to learn about Russian history. I'm a Soviet historian by training, but then that also provided a pivot point to teaching a graduate course on pedagogy for future faculty. That's a university-wide course, so we get about 80 students a year, all people who imagine that they will be faculty down the road but have perhaps never taken a course in what they're doing when they're teaching. It's the kind of course that I wish that I'd had back in the 20th century, and one of its great strengths, I think, is that it brings people from all disciplines. So we have, engineers, the natural sciences, the humanities, the social sciences, just really everything, everybody together. You get a bunch of really bright people together at a time in their life when they're really thinking about who they're going to become, and the relationships they develop in that course, along with the interaction, both on Wednesday evenings and asynchronously on the blogs during the week. And then we also live on a hashtag on Twitter, which is JediVT, GEDIVT, has allowed us to create this very expansive multi-generational networked community. So it's a course that people take, but they never leave, right? So they keep coming after they finish the course. They become Jedi Knights, and then they come back. So this is a current Jedi Master who just walked in. So the classroom switch led to the pedagogy course, which I moved. That course was developed by Shelley Fowler, who's now at VCU, and I've really kept it much as she designed it, but I've moved it out into the open. So it lives on an open website as much as possible. And then as that was happening, I also became a content and web developer for a really large OER in Soviet history. It's called 17 Moments in Soviet History. It was an OER before that was a thing. So it was first developed with NEH support in 2002, and the idea was to put primary materials for Soviet history, multimedia materials online. It was sort of imagined as like a primary source reader, the kind that you used to ask students to buy, but it would be more interactive and more interesting because it was online, and that was all very new and remarkable at the time. So I became part of the team for that when it was hacked and went offline very unexpectedly right before the semester started. And I should emphasize that this is a very popular OER. So we have about 500,000 users per year from all over the world. And at the peak times of the semester, we have like 15,000 90-day users. So people all over the world use this thing for their courses. And when it vanished, right as classes were starting, and it became clear it was going to be offline for quite a while, that caused a fair amount of consternation. So I helped reboot that as a WordPress install, and it's currently at MSU with Matrix. So that's definitely a big project of mine. And then the last one that I'll just mention, but not really say much about because Sue did a wonderful job of introducing it, is OpenLearning 18. So I'm the Open Pedagogy point person for OpenLearning 18, which has been a really wonderful experience, right? It's allowed me to meet new colleagues, and I would say if you're thinking about open learning and open education, please think about it as being more than just something that you do with your students. Like, you know, it's allowed me to meet wonderful people, not just at my school and not just in my field, but all over the world, all over the country. And it's enriched my kind of professional life in ways that are surprising and wonderful, right? Yeah, absolutely. That's it.
Thanks. Hey everyone, I'm Matt. So I'm going to start by talking about how I got into teaching at Virginia Commonwealth University, where I got my PhD. The sort of culture there was really wonderful. They love having students as adjuncts because adjuncts are cheap and students need money. And but the nice part about that is they essentially, when I was given a course and I was given undergraduate research, no one really likes teaching undergraduate research methods. They said, "Go." I know. I do too, actually, now. But they told me to go to the people who had taught it before, and the people who taught it before walked me through, this is my syllabus, this is my course calendar, here's all my PowerPoints, here's all my slideshows, activities, homework assignments, use whatever you want, change whatever you want, and just good. And if you have any questions during the semester, just let me know. And I really see OER as a way to sort of take that sort of model and scale it outward. And I know that that is not the case everywhere, and that I've given that sort of opening in rooms before, and people have given me a really quizzical look. But I thought that's how things worked, because I hadn't been teaching for very long. This is my second year at Radford. And Jackie DeLong, who is part of the OER librarians who were all trained under the Viva initiative, came to our social work department meeting one day and talked about OER, and we looked at the Open Textbook Network, or like faculty's sort of conclusions was, that's a great idea. There's no social work textbooks. We're very far behind the curve from most of you guys. We don't even have intro textbooks that exist in the Open Textbook Network. But I sort of took that as a call to action. I didn't particularly like the research methods textbook that I have been using. I've used a lot of them. And so I thought I could do better. And part of the Virginia's sort of initiative to get people to use OER is they had a small grant program where you can review a textbook inside of the Open Textbook Network. You have to write a fairly exhaustive review of it, and I really liked the book that I chose. And it was a sociology textbook. Sociology and social work are kindred spirits a lot of the time. So I figured I could adapt that for social work, which is what I did. And essentially just cut out the sociology stuff, put in social work stuff. So take out stuff about, field work and things like that, and put in stuff on evidence-based practice, things like that. And so I did that over last summer, and we piloted it in the fall semester of this year. Unfortunately, we didn't have enough people to do a good comparison for the spring, so we will get our full experimental data in the next fall. But what we ended up finding was that students are very concerned about textbook costs. This should probably not be any news to anybody. That they found the textbook to be of really good quality. They also liked that their professor actually adopted it. I think one of the things they really enjoyed about the adoption process from the end user perspective was that there was no skip this part. There was no jump from chapter to chapter. Everything was integrated to the way that I taught the class. And they were not only grateful for the effort that it takes to actually do all of that stuff, but they really liked that. So that's essentially what I'm doing for the next little while. I am currently in revisions on that bachelor's level textbook based on some of the feedback that we got from our pilot group. And like I said, we will get our final experimental results for our bachelor's textbook. I'll also be adapting a version for master's level. master's and bachelor's level research methods aren't that different. So it shouldn't hopefully take that long. And sort of the overall goal with that project is to get to a place where I can have a partner with an instructional designer at Radford, and we can create an online version of that that's a distance education book, and integrate that into a flipped classroom model for in-person students and for a distance education model for non-in-person students. I'm also trying to do some advocacy within the social work academia field. I just came from an awesome conference where it was really encouraged for faculty members to share their materials. So I go to social work education conferences. Part of the app, like, they had attachments, so like if you presented on an activity or something, they were all there, which is wonderful. But no one had given any thought to the copyright licenses that were attached to any of that stuff. Mm-hmm. So it seems like a really nice end to say, like, I'm glad you're doing all of this stuff, but we can scale this out so much more, and we can do it in a much more deliberate kind of way. So hopefully by the next couple of years or so, when you present at PPD or CSWE, which are completely nonsense acronyms to any of you guys, but or submit to any of the social work education journals, you'll also be prompted to share your stuff via Creative Commons.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. It's really nice to be here, and as I'm listening to my colleagues on the panel, I realize that for once what I'm doing actually kind of fits in with what everyone else is doing, and that we're kindred spirits here, and people aren't going to look at me with horror. So that's exciting. That's exciting. So as I mentioned in my little prelude, I teach future teachers, and together my students write their course textbook. And normally people do look at me with horror when I say that, why in the world would you have your students write the textbook? Do you want it to be inaccurate and full of horrible grammar and, probably indecent or who knows what else, right? And so, no, of course, that's not my aim, but my aim is to democratize the creation of educational resources, to provide more agency for my students. I see openness as not just openness in terms of access, but openness in terms of control. Who's making the decisions, right? So normally, faculty will select the textbook for students, and how does faculty select them? They're sent out to different faculty to review them. Students never participate in that reviewing of different textbooks, right? So students don't have a voice in choosing their textbooks. Their textbooks dictate, what they need to learn and how they need to learn it. So there's not a lot of agency inherent in courses. And so flipping this over and saying, okay, let's have the students actually create the resources, introduces student agency, and begins to disrupt some of those traditional power structures where it's only faculty who are making the decisions about what students learn. And actually, students don't even, evaluate course textbooks either, right? Again, that falls on faculty, but who's the audience for a textbook? It's not us as faculty. We're not the intended audience, right? It's students. Students are the intended audience. Shouldn't they be involved in the evaluation of their course text? That's an interesting question. So real briefly, basically how we create the textbook is each one of my students writes what I call a lesson. Since I'm teaching future teachers, I call this a lesson, but it could be easily called an article or a chapter or a feature. Right? So my students each create a lesson on a topic, and it's not like, just talk about whatever you want. There's a list of topics that they can choose from. So students are selecting a topic, and then they do some research, and it's a highly scaffolded project. They do some research, they get feedback from us, they write an essay, they get feedback from us and their peers, they write a lesson draft, they get feedback from their peers and from us as well. Then they have a final lesson that they create, and those are rated not by me, right? Those are rated by their classmates. Why? Because again, their classmates are their intended audience. So they're not writing a textbook for me, they're writing a textbook for their classmates. So if I think their content is wonderful, but their classmates fall asleep, right, don't get past paragraph 1, guess whose opinion is more important, right? Their classmates. Because if the text doesn't work for them, it's not an effective text, right? So the students do the evaluation of these lessons, and then I basically take the top, about 2/3 or so. I kind of look at how the students rated them, and then I pick a cutoff that seems reasonable. And anybody whose article was rated at that cutoff or higher becomes an official lesson in our course textbook. And then students are tested on that material as part of their final exam. And I actually take some of the questions that they write, that they incorporate into their lessons, and put those on the final exam. So students can at least get one question right. Oh, I know the answer because I wrote that question, right? Yeah, but people will ask me, again, why go through this? This is a lot more work than pulling a textbook off the shelf and just reading it. And absolutely, it definitely is a lot more work. But my students are learning technology skills. They're learning to give feedback. They're learning to receive feedback. I can teach about copyright because we're creating a text. I can teach about APA because they have to cite their sources. They're synthesizing material. They're writing for an authentic audience. It has real purpose, this task. It's not something that they're just turning in for me. So the number of skills that I can incorporate into this project are enormous. And so I see that although this is more work for me and my students, the learning potential of this opportunity is tremendous. Plus, I like this power shift, right, that my students then have some say in what they're talking about. So I might give them the topic of, let's say the topic is classroom discipline, and that's what they've signed up for, but then they get to decide what within classroom discipline am I going to focus on. Right, so they're making more decisions, deciding what they're going to learn and what their classmates will learn. And of course, the criteria they have for making those decisions is what's important for you as a pre-service teacher, what's going to interest your colleagues. And if you've written a lesson and it's only interesting to one other person in the class, you've essentially failed. So they do have some criteria on which they have to use to make those decisions about what goes into their text. So I probably used my 5 minutes, right? So I'll stop there and pass the mic.
Good morning, everybody. I guess I have a bit of a different arc than the rest of the panelists here. My formal introduction to OER was actually when Anita reached out to me to be on the panel. I am not someone who's participated in this, at least not from an explicit orientation beforehand. She wanted to have someone who represented experiential learning on the panel, and I think that's a really useful way of going about it. But I really want to thank her for doing so, because I think I've gotten a lot out of it, and our office is already being very conscious about the ways that we integrate open educational resources into what we do. And really what most of that comes from is from the pedagogy side of things. Our office is a catalyst for experiential learning. We don't actually do any of the programming that happens across campus. We're actually something that provides resources to the students and to the faculty that participate in experiential learning. And I think that's really a great opportunity for us to provide open resources for them. And what we're doing in our office is trying to create high impact practice experiential learning. And so a lot of the things we're adding are things like reflection, adding mentorship, having ways for students to catalog their experiences and have some sort of a formal output. And what we've been doing as an office is actually having those be in a public space. That is something that we think there's an incredible opportunity for students to learn from each other's work, to comment on each other's work, and we've been partnering with the library to build that into the e-portfolio system that the university is working on, and I think there's a real opportunity there. And then from the pedagogy side, we've been working with faculty across campus to look at how do we make some of the reflection modules and some of the other student experience things that they might have alongside their experiential learning fit a broad type of class or a type of experience, so that everyone can have a similar core of questions or a similar set of reflections that they can work from, but that still allow professors to tailor those experiences exactly to the experience that they have going forward. So it's a way to build the university community around a common set of a couple of things that everyone comments to, but it gives the faculty themselves the license to change that content or to work it around what their class might actually be using. And I think that, again, is going to be working with the Portfolium system here with the library to find a way to have that resource be available for everyone to edit and change to what they want to do with their own class. And then, again, in thinking a lot about what our office plays a role with OER and how the two kind of work together, I think there's tremendous potential for us to catalog the experiences that students are doing. So we're working with the library to archive what students are having in their outputs. And I think we have a lot of potential to think about how do we let students edit those types of things? How do we let students comment on them? How might we actually grow those experiences so that others can kind of be a part of the culture of experiential learning, and that's something that we're working through as we're kind of flying, I guess you might say. So this is a new office, and we have a lot of different things kind of going, but it's exciting to be here, and thank you guys for having me a part of the panel.
Okay, thank you. So Kathryn, can you hear? Oh, microphone. Kathryn, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about your project? Can you hear me, Kathryn? Okay, Kathryn, is her mic on?
Yeah, it's on.
Okay. Kathryn, if you are there, can you tell us a little bit about your project as well as the students that are with you and some of their experiences with it? We'll wait just a second. Okay, so I think that we have lost Kathryn, unless you can hear her. I cannot hear her.
She's blinking, so it suggests that she might be talking, but we just can't hear her.
Yeah.
Oh. Something's happening.
Sorry, can you try again?
Can you hear us now?
Yes. Thank you. I'm so glad. Please go ahead. We'd love to hear from all three of you.
Okay, so you can hear us now.
Yes.
Okay, well, welcome from Virginia Commonwealth University in the city of Richmond, and it's really great to see everybody at Virginia Tech there. Hello. I also heard Shelley Fowler's name come up, and I just had a meeting with her where she said for me to say hello to everybody as well. So the project that we're working on here at VCU came out of a problem, and the problem is in the foreign language departments, the different sections that we have, everybody has agreed that our 202, which is the second course, the last course in a second-year curriculum, was the worst course to teach and learn in. So we tried to look at the reasons why this course is just such a bugaboo. And the more we talked about it, the more we realized that it had a lot to do with student motivation and with just general interest in materials. So as we were brainstorming, we decided that it would be a good idea for us as an entire language department to look at this level and see how to fix this very critical course in the curriculum. If the students are disinterested in 202, they don't continue. If they're disinterested in 202, they don't really retain the things that they've learned up till that point. So we decided that we would try to do something that was much more student engaging. And so we came, and also using the idea that our students need digital communication competencies for the 21st century. So we came up with an idea of having the students curate the kinds of materials that they're actually interested in. The 202 level, we cover a variety of themes. It can be about travel in the different language countries. It can be about foods. It can be about environmental issues. So we decided to ask the students to curate, to go out and find what they're interested in. And at the time, Gardner Campbell was helping us here at VCU create Rampages, which is a WordPress platform that allows students to have e-portfolios, but also all kinds of different connected learning programs. So we built a platform for curations for each one of the classes that wanted to participate in this. And once we started curating, we had the idea that, well, this is great. Students are bringing in what they're really interested in, but they need scaffolding in order to help them be able to work through the materials that they have designated as being interesting. So we started a second part of the project, which is the modules part, where together with upper level students, we create scaffolded modules of the top rated curations that students have done each year, and then we're building those into an OER curriculum. This past year, we also included having teletandem, which is where our students at VCU connect with students in target countries and discuss issues and topics of mutual interest and concern. So now our students are discussing their curations with students who are native speakers about what they think of the different sights and sounds that our students have curated, and have much deeper, fuller discussions and interactions with the themes, the vocabulary, and the language skills that are needed to discuss those. So at any rate, that is the project that we're working on. I think the two factors, the fact that it's an OER project is very much part of our thinking about this being a student-centered, a truly student-centered program, because the themes come from the students, the actual materials come from the students, and then the creation of the modules comes from students as well. And then we're offering them learning materials that they can afford because they don't have to pay for them at all. And I'm going to stop there because as we go further down in this panel discussion, I think who you really want to hear from are the students who are here with me. So I'm going to be quiet and then wait for you to listen to them in the next set of questions.
That sounds great. Actually, let's start with your students, with Carrie and, I'm sorry, I wrote down your name, Savannah. We would love to hear from you regarding what your role has been in the project and how you got comfortable working in the open, or maybe you're still not comfortable working in the open, but what has it been like for you?
Well, so for me, my first experience with this project was when I was in a Russian 202 class at Institute level, where it's kind of a hard subject to learn and to teach. And so my first experience was doing this curation project, and the assignment was basically to go into the target language and try to find authentic materials. And so even just that kind of started to open me up to looking at my language learning in a different way. And going from that into kind of developing these modules as the framework for building these open resources. Really, I wouldn't say I'm quite comfortable yet, but still getting there, and it's definitely a learning experience. But I really appreciate the way it's kind of taught me to approach learning a language differently, and taught me the skills that I need to learn on my own even after I graduate.
So I began working on this project in the summer of 2016 with Spanish. And so that was after my first semester of being a Spanish tutor, where I would also tutor students in the 202 level. So I really saw like a lot of these problems like firsthand that Kathryn was mentioning. So by starting the project, I was really able to see ways that I could help students in my job as a tutor as well, and also how to continue my own language learning in the Italian classes that I was also taking after that, because I kind of passed the 202 level for Spanish like a while back. And since for about a year now, I've been working on the Italian component of the project, which is the same project that Carrie was mentioning, where we look through all the websites that the students have found. They've curated themselves. They're excited about different issues, whether it's music, culture in general, food, geography, everything in between. So you can really see their interest in the subject. And I basically look through those and I find which ones would be best for language learning, whether it's for grammar or whether it's for culture. And the ideal is to mix both of them together so that students can have these modules that they can learn a little bit of everything, so that it's also interesting for them in the future. This project has been a really great experience for me because I would love to be a language professor in the future. So I'm learning a lot of great tips from my faculty mentors, and I'm definitely becoming a lot more technologically competent, which is also a really great skill.
Thank you. So I'd like to open this up to both the audience as well as the panel for questions of each other and for each other. So we have some handheld microphones that I will distribute around the room, and this is your learning experience, but I'm sure you have questions for the panelists about some of the themes that you hear emerging about teaching beyond your discipline, about content, about student engagement and motivation. So please raise your hand if you want to ask a question of the other panelists, or if you'd like to ask a question from the audience.
Yes, I was just wondering if you could speak a little bit to how you are looking at addressing accessibility with your students in the creation of these open educational resources, if that's a topic of conversation, or any challenges or tips or tricks you might want you could share regarding consideration around accessibility.
Sure. Thank you for that. Is this good? Thank you for that question. So I've been struggling with this a lot, especially recently. So one of my motivations for doing what I do was to make things more accessible in all kinds of meanings of the word accessible. But I've realized, belatedly, and I hope not too late to fix it, that really making the tools that I use web accessible for users with any kind of disability is really a time-consuming challenge. So I'm really committed to doing it, and I think going forward I'm sort of building that in, so it won't be, I don't want to say it's time-consuming, so I'm not gonna do it. But one of the things Anita sort of asked us to think about when we were getting ready for the panel was what kinds of challenges we've faced with doing this work, and I would say so. What a big, for me, the two big challenges are time and support, right? So, like, I need to clone myself 2 or 3 times, which I would happily do because I love the extra engagement and interaction that I get with the students, and I think that's the point. But there is a finite amount of time in the day, and the accessibility piece, is a part of that, right? So, if that website's going to be accessible, I'm the one who has to go in and do all that tagging, and I have to make sure my students do that as well. And I want them to do that. It's very useful for them to learn, it's good. Like, we're just kind of folding that in along with citation practices and the licensing and all of that. So it does get folded in with all of that, but it's like, we're like, it's becoming a lot. So thank you, because this has been much on my mind. So. I think Rajiv has a question next.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to add, because it was relevant. Oh, gosh, never mind. I was just going to add, because it was relevant to this, a bit of a plug. In BC, we've developed the Open Textbook Accessibility Toolkit. So if anyone Googles the BC Open Textbook Accessibility Toolkit, you'll get a really nice set of guidelines that would help in the developing of OER to make them accessible, whether it's alt text or transcribing videos or color schemes for color blindness and a whole bunch of other things.
Oh man, that's exactly the thing I was about to ask for. So that's really great to hear. I know that from our small little pilot project, we found students who, when reading the traditional textbooks are often not printed in like 10-point font, and they're not particularly attractive to look at. So we had students who complained who had vision issues. So I really see adapting OER, and this is a basic response, as a way to make those materials more accessible via text-to-speech, via being able to actually increase the size of textbook, which if you browse like the Rebus textbooks is super easy.
This is a different kind of accessibility, but one of the things we did in the Open Access Week this time in OpenLearning 18 was we used a couple of articles that were not originally written in English. And Google Translations made those accessible to us. So articles that I could not normally read and understand were perfectly understandable. It was pretty amazing, the level of translation that was involved there. So this, I think, makes an experience like OpenLearning more globally open. So if we're posting articles in English, and non-native speakers of English want to read those, they can use Google translations as well. So I think that's probably a good example of a different kind of accessibility. That's a great question.
So we're talking a lot about content. I would like us to talk a little bit about process, because teaching is a process. And I'm wondering what kinds of challenges the panelists have encountered related to being more open, encouraging their students to participate in learning experiences that are maybe more public or more transparent. What kinds of challenges have you encountered? And this doesn't have to be online. It can be service learning. There's a broad continuum, so I don't want to exclude you at all. So, challenges.
Unless somebody else wants to. So I'll say that I would double down on the time thing. My students don't present challenges to me at all. I think I've faced a lot of challenges. And there's an ongoing challenge to leverage and amplify the good work that they're doing in ways that are really meaningful and durable to them in the long haul, right? So, the one thing that would make most of the work that I do with them, really resonant and easy for them to carry forward into the world would be something like domain of one's own, right? But it just doesn't seem, we just haven't been able to kind of pull that off here. So, it's fun. Like, you can use anything as a teaching tool, right? So I talk about what domain of one's own is, and then I explain why we do what we do, and I give them choices, right? We do have various options for setting up a website and all of that, and I sort of walk them through that and give them choices. So it's not an insurmountable thing, but I would say, like, given how time intensive open pedagogies are and teaching in the open is, I think there is this sort of fallacy around the idea that, if this is kind of online learning, then you're just kind of freely multiplying yourself and it doesn't really matter, right? Like, no, it's actually a ton of work. So it would just be great to see more institutional support for what the students then can take forward with them when they're done.
I think part of my answer kind of comes back to the question of access, but again, a different dimension of access. But it's where do you find the appropriate space for where a student is learning and putting themselves out there and actually needs to have that closed experience of, I'm reflecting on something I don't necessarily want anyone else to see. And I think that's really been a difficult thing for us to get the right calibration on. And I think it's probably experience to experience is how that shifts. But I think pushing students to continue to try to be in an open space, especially when you close it into a classroom setting, has tremendous potential. And I think it's really important for students to think a lot about how they go about presenting themselves online, because in many cases that can be something that kind of lives on in perpetuity, and we want to always be thoughtful about the way that students might do that. I think the other thing I was going to say is in working with students and faculty of trying to create these open modules that they can fine-tune to their own specificities, finding the right part of how many of the modules do we really want to be a common thing for every class, so that there's a rich data set of looking across experiences but also allowing that tailoring process. I think it's always very difficult on things like access and the way that you design these things to find the appropriate, as I said earlier, calibration of what you should allow. And we're still working through that issue. But
one thing that I've noticed about undergraduate students in particular is they don't buy into the idea of writing as a process where you do a draft, you get some feedback, and you revise your draft, you get some more feedback, you revise it again. You do it once, the day before it's due, or an hour before it's due, right? And then you are done. And you get some feedback from your teacher, oh, that's nice, right? And that's it. Mm-hmm. And so doing something where you're creating a book that you want to be read by others, you want it to be of decent quality.
And that involves revision. So what I've struggled with in terms of process is how do you scaffold a project so that students, you can build that revision process in there, knowing that students won't actually just go back and revise the same assignment multiple different times. So what I've figured out is that the only way to do this is to make everything a different assignment, right? So you've got to do your research assignment, then you've got to do your essay assignment, then you've got to do a draft assignment, then you've got to do a final assignment. So everything is a different assignment. So what becomes a challenge then is when my students look at the due dates and the list of assignments, there's like 50 things on that. So they're overwhelmed. They're very scared when they see, the syllabus and, why do you have 10,000 assignments in your course? How am I ever going to get that done? And so I have to keep telling them over and over, it's because everything is broken down and scaffolded. And as a teacher, you're going to be doing this for your students as well. But there's still a difficult balance to achieve there between adequately scaffolding assignment and not completely overwhelming students. So I would say that's a significant challenge for, at least for me, in this type of work.
Kathryn would like to speak.
Yeah.
Is there a chance that we can talk here from VCU?
Yes, please.
Please.
Oh, okay. I'm never sure if you can hear me or not. The process has been very difficult with a lot of student pushback. In traditional language courses, the faculty spend a lot of time working on skill development, increasing the lexical vocabulary work, working on specifics of grammar, doing fill-in-the-blank sort of things, not work. Eventually we want to get to the communicative part, but a lot is spent in just this fill-in-the-blank, very rote kind of learning. But actual language acquisition takes place when there is that confrontation and the creating of synaptal connections and so on. And it's hard work. And this project is asking the students in 202 who are going out and finding what they're interested in and having to really grapple with it, but not per se not working with a fill-in-the-blank situation. Last semester I got a great deal of pushback from my students because I took the skill parts, the vocabulary acquisition and the grammar work, and I put that over just as homework and told them that they needed to have worked on these things in order to then talk about their curations and be able to work with their curations. And again, I'm going to say there was a great deal of pushback from that. And I don't know, maybe Carrie has some reactions to that as well.
Yeah, I remember when I was in my Russian literacy class and we were first given this project, it was kind of a completely different experience. We didn't really understand what we were supposed to be doing. We had never done something like this where we had to go, we weren't just going and looking things up in Russian. We had to go to Russian Google, google.ru to find materials and start looking at things, not just made people trying to learn Russian who are English speakers, but made by people in Russia, people who are native speakers. And it was a completely different experience. And I had trouble trying to really grapple with what exactly that meant and what exactly we should be looking for and how to find it. So I can definitely understand that some students are going to struggle with it and have some pushback. But in the end, it really became a very valuable experience having to try to navigate that online and start to look for authentic material. And so it is a process of learning how to do it and learning how to be somewhat more self-sufficient learners and learn those practical skills.
Yeah, I would definitely say we've had the same problem with Spanish and Italian as well, and that sometimes students, will just choose maybe the first website to see or something that's maybe not great for language learning, just kind of the first page off of any random Italian website. So really the key is finding these resources that are interesting for students, but it is difficult when you're sorting through maybe 50 sites, but only 5 are really valuable. So I think that's been the biggest challenge is really encouraging students to find sources that are both educational and fun, finding that balance in between.
So as I'm listening to everybody, I think, at least just in self-reflection, it seems like the projects that I've been working on are maybe even a little bit a step behind what you guys are doing, which is really trying to address the power imbalances inside of the classroom and to have more collaborative approaches towards building teaching methods within the classrooms themselves. I don't mean that to self-deprecate, but like just as a forward. So, I mean, in social work, we are a very tightly regulated educational discipline. So we have specific educational practices and standards that we need to follow. I think there are 15 of them. And they all need to be course aligned with every single part of the course content. So every single assignment that you do that is part of your assessment needs to have these things attached to them. All of the books that you use need to speak this language. So I think, and just as, because this is probably my first exposure to really this level of openness inside of the classroom, is how do you guys deal with that stuff?
Can I add one more thing based on that? So I just wanted to follow up briefly based on what you just said and what James said earlier. So I think for working in the open, we make a mistake when we think it's an all or nothing kind of deal, right? So I think it's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity to raise awareness around what's open and what's not and why, right? You know, there are reasons to have a discussion that really only stays in the classroom or is only on the bulletin board. There are fields that have very strict accreditation standards where you are going to have to lock certain things down and do it in a really sequenced way. In my class, even though it's all out in the open, one of the databases that we use is a proprietary database that the library buys. It's really important. It's essential for them to use if they're going to get primary news accounts from the Soviet period if they don't read Russian. Google Translate is okay, but it's not, it's not perfect. It's a long way from perfect or fabulous as a translation mechanism. So they use that database, but they learn how to cite that database. And we talk about the difference, like, what is this database? What are these articles in that database? Why do you have access to it? Why is it worth, spending money for? What are you paying for when you're getting access to this database? And how are we using that in tandem with these other openly accessible high-value sources, right? So problematizing the idea that things that are open and free are not as good as the stuff that's behind the paywall, right? And instead thinking about how you identify high-value material, and then thinking also about real life, right? Real life isn't free. Real life isn't open access, right? So in real life, we look for open access opportunities to leverage things that we share in common because we think that'll make the world a better place. We think education is a public good. So let's lean in on that piece, but then also think about these other places where, yes, if you're going to have a difficult conversation in your class, you're probably not going to do that on Twitter, right? You're going to have that in class, and everybody's kind of power down for a while. So, okay.
I have a question from online.
Do you have a microphone? Yeah.
All right. So, Paige Mann asks, how do you bring along students who are less motivated or who have not bought into these kind of open pedagogical principles?
Absolutely. Yeah, I was just going to ask if, going back in the...
Get pushed. And no, don't have to.
Okay. Just backing up to what we were talking about some of the pushbacks from the students and related to that, some of the learning that encourages engagement is really great for students who are already bought into engagement. And I'm just wondering if you get pushback about, isn't that your job to build a course? I would see that as a hurdle with particularly undergraduates, and I just was wondering.
So those are related. Somebody want to? James, do you want to talk about?
Someone else should talk.
I've talked a lot.
Yeah. Can you send that down, please?
Oh, of course, yeah.
Thank you.
I didn't know that I was going first, but
Well, I can talk a little bit. So I teach a graduate course in assessment, and some of the things that we talk about are student motivation. So some of the theory behind motivation is that there's factors that drive intrinsic motivation. So intrinsic, comes from the inside. And some of those things are autonomy, right? So allowing students to make choices. Another one is relatedness, like are you connected to your community? I'm trying to remember, interest, relatedness.
Mastery.
What's the other one on this? Yes,
Mastery.
and competence, right? Competence or mastery. And so I try to think about those things as I'm working with my students. I do give them choice, right? So I try to provide that autonomy, and hopefully that's helping to drive their motivation. We have lots of feedback that's given to them, so that's helping to drive up the competence. If they're feeling more successful, they're more likely to be motivated. We're in a community, we're doing this together. People they can actually have a digital badge system, and they can nominate each other for digital badges. So you're helping to create products that are valued by each other, right? So that helps to drive up this component of relatedness. So I try to think about my teaching in terms of, how do I tap into those natural motivators for students, so that it's not the extrinsic, you do it or you get the the stick in the bad way or you fail. Sorry, right? But to think more about how do we get them to want to do it, which is not always easy, and absolutely there's still pushback. And you'll see if you come in the afternoon, I have one example of somebody who didn't do the best job. There's uneven quality in the work that my students produce, and I anticipate that, right?
I think it's great that you stopped on uneven quality, and I think you kind of have to celebrate that, or at least be very comfortable with how students are going to approach what they actually put forward in a very, you'll see a full spectrum of what's available. And I mean, experiential learning really kind of started with John Dewey, and it was this how do I learn to think? How do I learn to build processes, and how I experience something and learn to reflect on it consciously, learn from what I've just experienced, and how does that integrate into my prior worldview. And I think students, and really probably all of us, aren't quite there on doing that every single time, but I think as you just let students have a lot of license to maybe not be good at that at first. And I think some of those early reflection models really might not be that good, but I think if you're doing something that catalogs it, if you're doing something that grows with the student, there's a real opportunity to show their progress and how that can continue to grow. Because I know I'm not perfect at doing those types of things, but I think there's, I'll wake up tomorrow and try to do it better, I guess.
If I can talk real quickly, one of the things I think when we're talking about this open universe of learning, we have to realize, and I know we do, that there are many different kinds of learners, and different types of learners need different structures and different amounts of scaffolding and different amounts of constraints, actually. And so I know in working with our students on a curation project, there are students who just jump into it and are immediately trying lots of different things. Those are my risk takers. They're absolutely wonderful. But I have a whole gamut of students, and there are some who really need me to give them closer confines. And so I differentiate with them by asking them to come in and work with me so that I can give them closer parameters that make them feel more comfortable in their going out and seeking other open resources. So I guess I would just bring in the fact that differentiation across the gamut of learners is another really important part for us to build into our openness.
I think what stands out to me from this is just where we are now. I think that's probably an important thing to acknowledge. So again, I teach research methods. Students don't want to be there. So getting them to do anything is already a challenge. A lot of them don't buy the textbook unless there are quizzes to do it. They're not going to do the reading unless they absolutely have to. Because students are trying to maximize the time that is not spent doing the things for my class. And that's totally normal because those things are way more fun. There's only so much I can sort of brush up against the fun part of that. I think for the students inside of my classroom, really, since I'm not doing a more open pedagogy, let's all create this thing together, what they see is free. And what I expected to find inside of our study was that free would lead to more engagement, free would lead to higher satisfaction. What I did, I don't really find that. Surprisingly, the people who were using a traditional textbook found the course to be okay, and people who were using the open textbook also found the course to be okay. So I don't know, thought that was useful to have.
So I'd say the two things that help me get past student, I wouldn't say it's pushback, but skepticism are, number one, asking them to take a leap of faith with you, saying, okay, I know this is new, I know this is different, I know you think you don't like this, but just give it a try. And once they find out that they're writing for each other and that they're talking to each other and that they're interacting with each other, that I'm not their primary audience, generally the level of investment and engagement just kind of goes way up, right? I think many faculty labor under the mistaken assumption that students care what we think. And honestly, they do care what grade they get. But if you've ever provided detailed feedback on reflection papers or term papers or whatever, and then had that sinking feeling that no one really read what you wrote, the way around that is to push those conversations out into the open, have some skin in the game, have those conversations with your students. Let your students know that you care what they write, right? So my students post and they comment on what each other do, and I also comment. I don't make them do something that I'm not doing myself. And I say, look, I know this might not sound like a fun thing to do on Sunday night after you're hungover from the football game, but if you do this, it gives me a chance to read and respond to you, and for me to be part of a conversation you're having with your classmates. We can't do that, 40 people all together from 11 to 12:15 on Tuesday and Thursday. Like it's just not going to work. So I found that to be that goes a long way.
So for Open Learning 18, it's a little different because we're talking about adult learners in a voluntary learning environment. So it's really intrinsic, right? There's no grade.
And highly variable.
Yes. So no, Steve, you're not getting credit for Open Learning. So a lot of it comes down to time management and prioritization. And so one of my last blog posts for Open Learning 17, and in Open Learning 17, I was really more of a student. I was on the steering committee, but I had no idea what I was doing. No idea. Never been on Twitter, never blogged. I was deer in the headlights. And so I decided to do what I am now calling Learning Out Loud. I made that up this morning, a new LOL, Learning Out Loud. And so I was learning out loud through my blog post saying, oh my gosh, here's what I'm going through. It is crazy. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm participating in this Twitter chat. It's totally chaotic. But I got through it, and I figured out how to do it better the next time. And so when we decided this time for Open Learning 18, we decided to add a week that we called the Pre-MOOC week, because we recognized that there were a lot of people like me, like I had been in Open Learning 17, who were totally uninitiated to the land of connected learning. And it is definitely a different way of working. And so when we were asked to contribute things for that pre-MOOC week, one of the things that I contributed was this crazy blog post that I had written about how crazy my life was in Open Learning 17, and tried to be really honest about the discomfort, the confusion, and also the really exciting things that happened when I started to understand how it worked and how I could get more out of it. And so I guess motivation by, I don't know if it's fear or like, hey, guess what? You're going to be really uncomfortable in this experience, but you're going to get so much out of it.
And you heard one of the students say that from DCU.
So one comment from the audience that was a comment that one of the students gave, that they got a lot out of it. So is there a question? Yeah, press the green. Make it green.
Sorry, just in the spirit of Edith earlier, first of all, I love how nuanced this conversation is about the discussion about scaffolding and the balance and But there is this lovely guide, again, for a guide to making open textbooks with students, which I think is really helpful. And it's in progress, but I think it helps have those discussions with students with sample MOUs for students to teach them about open licensing, some literacy skills involved. So I would recommend doing that as well.
Thank you. Right. So if they did Open Learning 18. So on Open Learning 18, this was the assignment for yesterday's assignment was hypothesis annotation of Chapter 1 of that wonderful resource. Yeah.
Okay, so I have one final question, and it is, if you were giving advice to someone about how they could be a little bit, how they could dip their toes in the water, what are some steps that someone could take? Maybe they're not, an instructor's not ready to they want to take a little bit of an open step. What would you suggest that they do?
I have one ready.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm not ready, so go ahead.
So another project I've done with my students was on a WordPress site, and I know we've got some big WordPress users out here, but I had my students share a story of their identity development, so a story from middle school or high school. And the beauty about this is course content. The students were very motivated to read each other's stories. You know, they could use a pseudonym, so their story could be, they could protect their identity. And then students just went in and commented on each other's stories. But this was, I think, a really amazing learning opportunity for my students. It wasn't, they didn't have to create any sophisticated content that was highly technical. They didn't have to curate other stories. It was just their own story. But they again, teaching about diversity and recognizing other people's opinions. And one of the stories that came out that I was surprised by was one girl wrote about being a cheerleader. Right? You would think, oh, come on, like that's the least diverse person we've got to worry about. Everybody loves a cheerleader. But she talked about students thinking that she was promiscuous, students thinking that she was stupid. Teachers even having those opinions as well. And so I think for a lot of us, who maybe weren't that student in high school, it really gave us insight into her experience and the pain that she felt from people judging her. And of course there were other ones from different groups as well, but it was an easy assignment where you could start, you're creating some kind of a blog, having students write a narrative. They don't need to do a lot of research for that, and then sharing and commenting on each other. I also really we tagged it because it was a blog, and that allowed me to center narratives from from typically marginalized populations as well. So it allowed me to kind of reshift whose stories got to be at the center of the conversation. And students had to comment on people who were similar to them and also people who were different than them. So it was a fairly easy class assignment, not that high stakes, but you're still then beginning to get into this mode of student-generated resources that other people can benefit from.
Share your stuff. It is the easiest way to do that. Sorry, I just came from, I just mentioned, I just came from a bunch of social work conferences. You already have things to share. How many times, I was just at this conference, how many times have we reinvented the wheel? How many people have written how to write a research proposal prompt? That's ridiculous. Why do we do that? If you have stuff, please share it on OER Commons or on Merlot. Put it up on your university repository and share that link with other people. It's crazy to me that we don't do that. I know a lot of you are, I'm preaching to the choir here, but yeah.
So for faculty, I would say humanities, if you're in humanities, humanities commons is a great place. And on the instructional side, do one thing. Don't feel like you have to reinvent yourself overnight, right? Make one shift. If you're afraid of WordPress, don't want to do it online, do an analog Twitter exercise with your students in class, where they collaborate with each other, they're listening to each other, you're just going to use Post-it notes, right? But the experience will probably inspire you to think of ways you can build on that. Sue, are you going?
I think it's also really important to start with the students and ask them where they want to be open, because the students are already living in this open social media world and may have of really great ways, interesting ways, engaging ways that they would like to intersect with the materials and with their colleagues and with learning in general.
Okay, one more.
I think really what I would say is that as we worked to scaffold out experiential learning here at the university, the student voice has been the one that I've been most astounded by, and I think really bringing that up to the top has been what I've been most surprised by, is how thoughtful they are and how much that voice really resonates with the things that we're trying to do. And I think we do a lot of administrative fathoming of what students might want, and I think this is open resources is a true opportunity to really get a lot of that voice built into what you're trying to do.
We are at time. We are at the end of our time, and I want to thank all of our panelists for being here. Thank you especially to those who drove many hours to come here. And we'll be back at 10 after 1 for the keynote. We hope to see you again, and thank you so much.